Learn how easy it is to build and deploy an Azure function with Azure DevOps in this episode of Azure Tips and Tricks. Here in the Azure portal, I have deployed a .NET-based function app to a Windows-based Azure function. Let's learn how we can automate the build and release process for this app with Azure DevOps. This is the Azure DevOps portal, and here are its pipelines. I don't have any yet, so let's start by creating a new one. This will create a new build pipeline. First, it asks me where my code is. Before I answer that, let's switch to the classic editor, which is easier to start with than the YAML one. You can always switch between the classic editor and the YAML one later on. I've committed my code in Azure Repos, which is Azure DevOps' Git repository. And that is this repo and branch. Let's continue. Now I can choose what my build pipeline will look like. There are lots of pre-made templates that make my life easier, and I can also create a pipeline from scratch. I'll select the Azure function for .NET pipeline and select Apply. Okay, there we go. These are all the steps needed to build my function. Isn't that cool? The only thing I like to switch is the agent, which is the machine it uses to run the build. Okay, you can leave this as is or add more tasks or configure it as you want. Let's save the pipeline and queue a build. Here we go. We now have a build queued that will pick up the code, compile it and publish it to a place where we can use it. Whilst that is working, I can create a release process. Let's start. Again, I get to pick a template or start from scratch. Let's see. I need this one to deploy my function to Azure. Okay. The template creates steps for a release process for this stage here. Let's give it a name. I can have many stages like this, like dev, test, production and so on, and deploy my build package to all of them. Let's take a look inside this stage. Here is the release process with just one step. Let's configure it. Here, select the Azure subscription it will use, and because this is the first time I'm using it, I need to authorize Azure DevOps to use it, like this. Okay. And now select the type, which is Windows. And finally, the Azure function that I want to deploy to. Alright, that's it. Now I can save it. And we're done. Let's go back to the releases and go to the overview again. Here we go. Now this is where it all starts. This is the artifact, the results from the build process. I can tell it here to start the release when the build finishes. Cool, right? Alright, now create a release like this. And there it goes. I'll take a look here and it is running. The release is now picking up the artifacts from the build process and deploying them to the Azure function. In its simplest form, it just takes a couple of minutes to set up a complete CI and CD pipeline. Of course, this was a simple demo application, but you can easily tell the pipelines to use other source code, or you can add tasks to them or configure them differently for your scenarios. Go and check it out.